Sarah Vale stood alone beside the church steps with one torn glove in her hand, and the county deputy reading aloud that she had no lawful name. The wind dragged dust across her black dress, and behind her the Sunday crowd whispered as if loneliness itself were a crime. She had come west with a train ticket, a letter, and the promise of a new life, but somewhere between the depot and the bell tower, the ticket vanished. Without it, the clerk said she was nobody. Without a name, she could not claim the small inheritance waiting in Red Willow County. Then a stranger in a gray coat stepped from the road, dropped a folded ticket near the church gate, and looked straight at the man trying to ruin her. Before we begin, let me know where you are watching from. Leave your country name in the comments below. And if you love stories about courage, loyalty, and community, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. The first thing Sarah Vale noticed about Red Willow was not the church bell, or the boardwalk, or the line of horses tied along Main Street. It was a child's ribbon caught on a thorn bush beside the depot, faded blue and fluttering like a tiny flag of surrender. She stopped in the dust and stared at it longer than she meant to. The ribbon made her think of the little sister she had buried in Missouri. It made her think of the way small things got left behind when people had to run, or move, or pretend they were stronger than they were. The train behind her hissed like a tired beast. Men climbed down with carpetbags and tobacco breath. Women gathered their skirts and looked for husbands, cousins, wagons, reasons to smile. Sarah had no one waiting for her. She had one valise, one letter from a woman named Aunt Rosalie, whom she had never met, and a ticket stub folded inside the lining of her glove. She touched that glove now, still there. Her whole future lay in that thin paper, not because it was worth money, but because it proved where she had come from, where she had boarded, and the name under which the conductor had marked her passage, Sarah Ann Vale, in a county that did not know her face. Paper could be the difference between a woman and a rumor. Red Willow sat beneath a wide Kansas sky, all sun-baked clapboard and prairie grass bending in the wind. A white church stood near the road that led from the depot, its steeple sharp against the blue. Beyond town, cattle speckled the hills. Farther still, cottonwoods marked a creek, and the land rolled outward in tawny waves. Sarah had imagined arriving with dignity. She had pictured herself walking into the county office, presenting Aunt Rosalie's letter, and learning whether the old woman's promise was true. A place to stay, a room of her own, might be a few acres, might be just enough money to stop sewing until midnight for other people. Instead, the moment she stepped from the train, a tall man in a black vest had called her by a name that was not hers. Miss Larkin. Sarah turned. No, sir. The man smiled too quickly. Beg your pardon. We were expecting a Miss Larkin. I am Sarah Vale. The smile thinned. Are you? There was something in his voice that made her close her fingers around her glove. He introduced himself as Thaddeus Pike, clerk of Red Willow County. He was narrow-shouldered, smooth-shaven, and too clean for a town full of dust. His boots shone like polished beetles. He said he had been sent to meet any woman arriving about the Vale matter. The Vale matter? Sarah asked. A legal phrase, he said. Nothing to trouble yourself over, provided your papers are in order. She almost showed him the letter then. Something stopped her. Maybe it was the way he glanced at her valise. Maybe it was the ribbon caught on the thorn bush, trembling like a warning. My papers are safe, she said. Pike's eyes moved to her glove. Before he could answer, a wagon rattled between them, driven by a broad-shouldered man in a dust-colored hat. 2 feed sacks shifted in the back. The team shied at the train whistle, and the driver pulled them steady with one strong hand and a quiet word. Sarah noticed that. Not the strength, but the quiet. He looked at her only once, briefly, as if making sure she was not in harm's way. His face was browned by weather, marked by work, and serious in a manner that did not ask for attention. Then the wagon passed on toward the mercantile. Pike cleared his throat. The county office closes at noon on Saturdays. You'll come Monday morning. Until then, I suggest the boarding house. I was told there was a room at my aunt's house. Was there? Pike asked. My letter says so. Letters say many things. Sarah held his gaze, though her knees had begun to feel weak from the long ride and the longer fear that had carried her west. Then I will ask at the church. Aunt Rosalie mentioned Reverend Colton. Pike's jaw tightened before he covered it with another smile. Of course, the church is always eager to help the needy. The word followed her down the road like a tin cup tied to a dog's tail. At the church, women were arranging flowers for Sunday service. They looked up when Sarah entered, and all conversation drew itself thin. Reverend Colton was not there. His wife, a pale woman with kind eyes and cautious hands, listened while Sarah gave her name. Rosalie Vale, Mrs. Colton repeated. Rest, she worshipped here when her health allowed. She wrote to me before she died, Sarah said. She said I was her sister's granddaughter. She said if I ever needed refuge, I should come. Mrs. Colton's face changed at the word refuge. You had better sit down. Sarah did not want to sit. Sitting meant she had arrived at a place where bad news was already waiting. But her legs betrayed her, and she lowered herself onto a back pew beneath the smell of oiled wood and wilting lilies. Mrs. Colton explained carefully. Aunt Rosalie had indeed died 3 months earlier. She had left behind a small house, a strip of pasture, and a claim to water rights along Mercy Creek. Modest things, Mrs. Colton said, but valuable because the railroad had begun buying land nearby. If Rosalie had no lawful heir, the property would be taken under county authority, sold for taxes and fees. But I am her heir, Sarah said. Then, you must prove it. I have her letter. That might help, and my train ticket. Mrs. Colton blinked. Your ticket. It bears my name and point of origin. Aunt Rosalie wrote to me in care of the seamstress shop in St. Joseph. The ticket matches my journey. Mrs. Colton lowered her voice. Guard it. Sarah smiled faintly. You sound as if paper can be stolen. In Red Willow, Mrs. Colton said, land can make honest men forget their prayers. Sarah spent the night in the church vestry on a narrow cot under a quilt that smelled of cedar. Outside, the town settled into darkness. Horses blew softly at hitching posts. A saloon piano stumbled through a lively tune, then fell quiet. Once, a train whistle sounded far off, lonely enough to make Sarah press her fist against her mouth. She had been alone before. Loneliness was not new. It had sat beside her at supper tables, followed her through rented rooms, and watched her stitch wedding dresses for girls whose mothers cried happy tears. But this loneliness was different. It had teeth. On Sunday morning, she dressed carefully in her black gown, brushed train dust from the hem, and tucked Aunt Rosalie's letter inside her bodice. The ticket she kept in her glove. The church filled slowly. Ranch families came smelling of soap and leather. Children squirmed. Old men leaned on canes. The man from the wagon entered near the end and sat alone on the left, hat in his lap, eyes lowered. Sarah learned his name from a whisper behind her. Eli Mercer, someone said, still sits like a storm cloud. Hush. His wife's been gone 2 years. Sarah did not turn, but she felt the weight of that small sentence. Widowed men and solitary women were often treated as warnings by those who feared sorrow might spread. Reverend Colton preached on truth. Sarah tried to take comfort in that, but Thaddeus Pike sat in the front pew, and each time the Reverend said the word truth, Pike looked down as if hiding a smile. After service, Mrs. Colton brought Sarah forward to meet a few women. Their kindness came wrapped in curiosity. You traveled alone, all the way from East Surrey. Were there no menfolk to accompany you? Sarah answered softly until the questions blurred. Then Pike stepped near with the deputy at his side. Miss Vale, he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Since you have publicly presented yourself in connection with the Vale property, I must ask whether you can produce proof of identity. The churchyard went still. Sarah felt heat rise to her face. Tomorrow at the county office? I'm afraid this cannot wait. There have been false claimants before. For the protection of lawful property, you understand. She looked at Reverend Colton, but he seemed caught between pastoral concern and civic fear. Mrs. Colton's hand tightened around her hymnal. Sarah drew a breath. Very well. She pulled off her glove. The ticket was not there. For one terrible second, her mind refused to understand. She looked inside the glove, shook it, turned it inside out. Nothing fell but a grain of dust. Pike's expression did not change, but something like triumph moved behind his eyes. My letter, Sarah whispered. A letter can be written by anyone, Pike said. It is from Rosalie Vale, or said to be. The deputy, a young man with a red neck and nervous hands, shifted his weight. Mr. Pike, my bay, this ain't the place. It is exactly the place, Pike said. Before witnesses, Sarah heard murmurs around her. False claimant, poor thing, no proof. Came alone, might not even be her name. That last whisper struck hardest. Not even her name. Then a voice spoke from the road beyond the church gate. Looking for this? A stranger stood in the dust where the path met the street. He wore a gray coat too fine for a drover and too worn for a banker. His hat shadowed his face. In his hand was a folded train ticket. No one moved. The stranger stepped forward and let the paper fall near the church gate, not at Pike's feet, not at Sarah's, but in the open dust where everyone could see it. Found it, he said, near the deep plot road. Pike's face lost color for just a breath. Sarah stared at the ticket. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely hear the church bell begin to ring above them. Eli Mercer rose from the edge of the crowd and walked to the gate. He picked up the ticket, opened it, and read the name. Sarah Ann Vale, he said. The crowd turned toward her as if she had suddenly become visible again. But Pike stepped forward quickly. A drop ticket proves only that such a ticket exists. It does not prove it belongs to her. The stranger's mouth bent in a humorless smile. Then I suppose you'd better ask why it was dropped only after you asked for it. Pike looked at him sharply. Who are you? Sarah asked. The stranger tipped his hat not to Pike but to her. A man who came too late once. Try not to do it twice. Before anyone could question him further, he turned and walked toward the livery stable, leaving behind a ticket, a town full of suspicion, and Sarah Vale with her name returned to her hand, but not yet safe. By Monday morning, Red Willow had divided itself into two kinds of people. Those who believed Sarah Vale was a wronged heir, and those who believed wronged heirs should not arrive so conveniently alone. The county office stood beside the jail, its windows high and dusty, its walls smelling of ink, paper, and old tobacco. Sarah sat on a wooden bench with Aunt Rosalie's letter in her lap and the train ticket folded beneath her palm. Mrs. Colton had offered to come with her, but Sarah had refused at first. She did not want to begin her new life needing to be escorted like a child. Then, halfway down the boardwalk, she saw Eli Mercer waiting outside the Mercantile with his hat in his hands. I'm going to the courthouse, he said. So am I. I know, it was not said proudly. Not like a man announcing protection, more like a man admitting he had a wagon headed the same direction through dangerous weather. Sarah looked past him. Did Mrs. Colton ask you? No. Then why? He glanced toward the county office. Because Pike looked disappointed when your ticket came back? That answer settled something in her. They walked together without speaking. His stride was slower than hers could have been, as if he had matched it without meaning to. The town watched from windows and porches. Sarah felt each glance like burrs catching on her skirt. Inside the office, Pike arranged papers with delicate care. A county commissioner named Abel Cross sat beside him, thick-necked and gray-bearded. Deputy Harlan stood near the wall. Reverend Colton had come after all, his hat pressed to his chest. Eli remained by the door until Cross looked up. "This is a county proceeding, Mercer. Then it ought to be witnessed," Eli said. Pike smiled. "Mr. Mercer is known for mistaking silence for authority." Eli did not answer. That seemed to bother Pike more than any insult. Sarah gave her letter, her ticket, and the locket Aunt Rosalie had sent in her final envelope. It contained a tiny painted portrait of a young woman Sarah had been told was her grandmother. Pike inspected each item. "The letter is sentimental," he said. "It names me. Names can be assumed. The ticket bears my name, purchased under a name, yes. The locket belonged to my grandmother, or to anyone." Sarah's fingers tightened in her lap. Commissioner Cross leaned back. "Miss Vale, the difficulty is this. Rosalie Vale's will names the granddaughter of my sister Eleanor, known to me as Sarah Ann Vale. There is no birth record in this county, no marriage record, no witness here who knew you as a child. I was not raised here." "Exactly." Pike folded his hands. "And the county has already incurred expense maintaining the property, paying delinquent taxes, and securing it from trespass. If no heir is confirmed soon, the land must be sold." Pike looked at him. "At public auction." "Public," Eli repeated. "With notice posted where?" "A.T. Post. Time." Sarah turned to Eli. "You know about the land. Mercy Creek water touches my south pasture," he said. "Rosalie Strip sits between my place and the railroad survey." Commissioner Cross frowned. "Which gives you an interest in this matter too, Mercer?" "Yes," Eli said. "An interest in seeing Pike not steal it." The room snapped quiet. Pike rose. "Da. Prove me wrong." Sarah saw something pass between the men, old and shocked. Cross struck the desk with his palm. "Enough, Miss Vale, until further proof is provided. The county cannot release the property. You might remain in town for 7 days while inquiry is made. After that, we proceed according to law." "Where am I to stay?" Sarah asked. Pike lifted one shoulder. "The boarding house takes payment in advance. I have very little money." "Then perhaps the church charity." "No," Eli said. Everyone looked at him. Eli's jaw worked once. "Rosalie's house is standing empty." Pike laughed softly and placed an unconfirmed claimant inside the disputed property. "Convenient. She can stay at my ranch," Eli said. Sarah turned startled. So did everyone else. Mrs. Pike's sewing circle would have had a year's worth of whispers from that sentence alone. Pike's smile returned. A single woman under the roof of a widower. That might not help her reputation. Eyes hardened. "My housekeeper lives there. My foreman too. And my late wife's mother when her bones allow the ride. You can write that down if your ink is honest." Sarah should have refused. Pride urged her to. Fear urged her not to. The boarding house would cost money she needed for food. The church vestry was kindness, but charity could become a collar. And Pike wanted her exposed, dependent, humiliated. She looked at Eli Mercer. He did not smile. He did not ask for gratitude. He stood like a fence post in hard weather, plain and necessary. "I can work," she said. "I sew, cook some, mend harness if the leather isn't too thick. My cook burned biscuits black this morning." Eli said, "How welcome the mercy." That was how Sarah Vale left town in Eli Mercer's wagon, with her valise at her feet, her ticket hidden in her bodice, and half of Red Willow watching, as if she were either rescued or ruined. The Mercer Ranch lay 3 miles west, where prairie opened wide beneath a sky that made every grief feel both smaller and harder to hide. The house was built of weathered boards, with a porch shaded by cottonwoods and a barn, red enough to glow in the late sun. Horses lifted their heads as the wagon rolled in. Somewhere a hammer rang, somewhere a cow bawled like a complaint against the world. "This is Willow Bend," Eli said. Sarah looked at the creek flashing beyond the pasture. "It's beautiful. It's work," she almost smiled. "Most beautiful things are." He glanced at her then, wicked and quiet. The housekeeper, Mrs. Alma Briggs, was a stout widow with silver hair, sharp eyes, and flour on her forearms. She looked Sarah up and down, then looked at Eli. "You brought trouble home?" "Eyes, ma'am," Eli said. "Does trouble eat? When fat?" Mrs. Briggs snorted. "Then come in, girl. I've got stew enough for trouble." That evening, Sarah ate at the long kitchen table with Eli, Mrs. Briggs, and two ranch hands named Tom and Jude. No one asked questions at first. That was a mercy. Outside, lantern lights swung in the barn. The smell of hay and horses moved through the open window. Sarah felt the day loosening its grip on her bones. After supper, Mrs. Briggs showed her a small room under the eaves. "It was a sewing room once," she said. Sarah saw folded fabric stacked in a cedar chest, a cracked looking glass, and a narrow bed covered with a blue quilt. "Your wife's?" she asked, before she could stop herself. Mrs. Briggs' face softened by a fraction. "Eli's mother's, then Rebecca's for a while. His wife liked the morning light. I can sleep elsewhere. Dead women don't need rooms left empty forever," Mrs. Briggs said. "But living folks need rest." That night, Sarah lay awake, listening to the ranch breathe. Boards creaked, cattle shifted beyond the dark. The wind moved under the eaves. Once she heard Eli on the porch below, walking slowly, then stopping. She wondered if grief had a sound when no one was there to hear it. By morning, she had tied on an apron and taken command of a basket of mending. Work steadied her. A torn cuff asked no questions. A split seam did not care whether a county clerk believed your name. By noon, she had repaired 3 shirts, patched a flour sack, and saved Mrs. Briggs from a batch of dough gone too stiff. "You sure you ain't run a household?" Mrs. Briggs asked. "He ran other people's corner. Same thing, with less tanks." Eli came in at midday with dust on his hat and blood on his sleeve. Sarah stood. "You're hurt? Calf hooked me. Sit down. It's nothing." Men say that when they mean they hope it becomes nothing. Mrs. Briggs pointed at the chair. "Sit." Eli sat. Sarah cleaned the cut with boiled water while he stared at the wall as if submitting to a legal penalty. The wound was not deep, but it was ragged. "You've done this before," he said. "My father cut himself often. He drank often, too." The two habits kept company. Eli's eyes moved to her face, but he did not pry. "He gone?" "Yes, I'm sorry." She tied the bandage. "So was he. Sometimes it was more truth than she meant to give." The room grew still around it. Eli said quietly, "My wife died in childbed. The baby, too." Sarah's hands paused. He looked down at the bandage. "Folks think if a man says it plain, it hurts less." "It doesn't." "No," Sarah said. "It only means the heart has learned to stand upright." That was the first moment between them that did not feel like rescue or obligation. It felt like two wounded people standing on opposite banks of the same creek, seeing the water for what it was. Over the next days, Sarah learned the rhythm of Willow Bend. Dawn came pale over the grass. Eli rode out before full light, and the men followed with ropes, tools, and sleepy curses. Mrs. Briggs ruled the kitchen with a wooden spoon. Sarah cooked, mended, gathered eggs, and once helped pull a foal from a mare while rain tapped softly on the barn roof. The foal came wrong. Legs tangled. Eli's face tightened, but his voice stayed calm. Sarah held the lantern while he worked, his hands gentle and sure. "She's tiring," he said. "So are you. Hold the light closer." The mare groaned. Sarah stepped into the straw, skirts forgotten, and pressed one hand against the animal's neck. "You are not alone," she whispered. Come on, girl, not alone. Eli glanced at her when she said it. The foal slid free near midnight, wet and trembling. When it tried to stand, Sarah laughed before she knew she could. Eli looked at her across the straw, and something in his face changed, not into happiness exactly, but into remembrance of it. They named the foal Sunday, because she had survived the dock and found her legs near morning. Trust did not arrive like lightning. It came in smaller ways. Eli began leaving the coffee pot where Sarah could reach it without asking. Sarah learned which shirts were his favorite by the worn elbows and mended those first. He showed her how to read weather and the cattle's behavior. She showed him how to mend a torn saddlebag with a hidden stitch strong enough to hold through rain. One afternoon, they rode to the far pasture to check a broken fence Sarah had not ridden since childhood, and the mare beneath her knew it. She can smell fear, Eli said. She can smell sense, same thing, in a horse's opinion. Sarah laughed, and the sound startled both of them. They found the fence cut, not broken. Eli crouched in the grass holding the wire. Knife marks. Who would do that? Someone wanting cattle to drift. Pike. Might be. Or men who work for men like Pike. A chill moved through Sarah despite the sun. Eli stood. Russell's land controls the creek crossing. If the county sells, Pike's friends buy. If Pike's friends buy, my south herd loses water unless I pay his price. So helping me helps you. I understand. The honest answer stung less than a prettier lie would have. He looked at her. But that ain't why I brought you here. Why did you? He took a long time to answer. Because I know what it is to have folks speak over a life they didn't live. Wind moved through the grass between them. Sarah looked toward the creek, silver under cottonwood shade. When I was 12, my mother died owing rent. The landlord kept her trunk because he said debt weighed more than grief. Inside was her Bible, her wedding comb, and the only picture of her as a girl. I remember thinking a person could be taken apart by men with keys. Elias' voice was rough. Is that why you came for Rosalie's house? I came because she wrote, no woman should have to beg the world to call her by her own name. I carried that line all the way from Missouri. Eli watched her a moment. Then he took off his hat, not dramatically, not like a vow, but with the quiet respect men offered graves and altars. She sounds like a woman worth fighting for. Sarah folded her hands around the reins. I hope I am too, by the end of the week. Red Willow's judgment had not softened. At the mercantile, women lowered their voices when Sarah entered. At the blacksmith, men stopped talking until Eli passed. The saloon keeper, who saw more truth than the church ladies admitted, told Sarah under his breath that Pike had been asking about the gray-coated stranger. What stranger? Sarah asked too quickly. The one who found your ticket. Came in, bought coffee, paid with a Denver coin, and asked where the old telegraph office used to be. Eli heard that and frowned. Telegraph office burned 6 years ago. Then why ask? Sarah said. Because he knew it existed. They left town with flour, coffee, lamp oil, and more questions than they had brought. Near the church gate, Sarah saw something caught beneath the fence rail. A scrap of gray thread. Eli saw it too. Neither of them spoke until the wagon had passed the last house. The seventh day arrived with thunderheads building in the west and the county office full enough to feel like Sunday judgment without the hymns. Sarah stood before Commissioner Cross again, and Rosalie's letter in hand. The ticket placed on the desk, the locket open beside it. Pike had prepared himself. He wore a dark coat and a patient expression, as if sorrowing over the necessity of destroying her. Since our last meeting, he said, I have made inquiries. There is no record of a Sarah Ann Vale born to Eleanor Vale's line in any county registry available to us. Sarah's stomach tightened. I was born at home, she said, in Boone County. My mother told me the church burned the year after. How unfortunate. Pike said. Eli, standing near the back wall, said, "Fires do seem to favor your arguments." Pike ignored him. "Furthermore, I have a sworn statement from Mrs. Dinah Price, formerly of St. Joseph's, who says a woman matching Miss Vale's description worked under the name Sarah Bell." Sarah closed her eyes briefly. "That was my mother's married name," she said. "My father's name. I used Vale after he died because my mother told me it was her true family name." "Convenient again," Pike said. "No, complicated. Law dislikes complication. Men dislike complication when it protects women," she answered. A murmur ran through the room. Commissioner Cross leaned forward. "Miss Vale, can anyone confirm that your mother was Eleanor Vale's daughter?" "My mother could have. She is deceased." "Yes, your father, also deceased? Any sibling?" Sarah thought of the blue ribbon of a small grave under a crooked cedar. "No living." Pike spread his hands. "Then we are left with a letter that might be genuine, a ticket that might have been planted, and a claimant who used another surname until money was involved." The word money struck Sarah like an insult. "It is not money," she said. "It is home." Pike's voice cooled. "It is property." The door opened. Rain wind swept into the room, carrying dust and the smell of storm. The gray-coated stranger stepped inside and removed his hat. The deputy moved his hand toward his pistol. "State your business." The stranger looked at Sarah first. His eyes were dark, tired, and familiar in a way she could not place. "My business is with the Vale claim." Pike stood. "This man has already interfered once, twice, if you count keeping the ticket out of your pocket," the stranger said. The room erupted. Commissioner Cross banged his cane. "Order. Give your name." The stranger hesitated. Sarah felt the air change. "Daniel Vale," he said. Her heart stumbled. Pike laughed once. "There is no Daniel Vale in Rosalie's will." "No," the stranger said. "Because Rosalie thought me dead." Sarah gripped the back of a chair. Pike's face had gone hard. "This is absurd." Daniel looked at her with something like apology. "Your mother Eleanor had a brother, me. That would make you your great-uncle. If blood still counts after a man ruins his life." Pike's face had gone hard. "This is absurd." Daniel reached inside his coat. The deputy drew his pistol halfway, but Eli stepped forward fast, putting himself between the weapon and Sarah. "Easy," Eli said. Daniel withdrew a packet of oilcloth-wrapped papers and laid them on the desk. Marriage record of Eleanor Vale to Thomas Bell. Baptism record for their daughter Sarah Ann Bell, later acknowledged by Rosalie Vale as kin. 2 letters from Rosalie to me before she stopped writing. And 1 letter I never answered because I was in prison. No one breathed. Sarah could hear rain begin against the windows. Pike snatched up 1 paper, then another. "These are all unverified." Daniel's gaze fixed on him. "So is your theft, but it seems lively enough." Commissioner Cross took the papers from Pike. His lips moved as he read. Reverend Colton, who had come again as witness, stepped closer. "I know that handwriting," the Reverend said softly. Rosalie's. Pike's control cracked. A convict's testimony means nothing." Sarah looked at Daniel. "Prison." He did not flinch. "Train robbery. 12 years ago. I drove horses for men worse than me and swore I didn't know what they meant to do. A jury disagreed. My bear rightly. Rosalie begged me to come home when I was released. I was ashamed. By the time I reached Red Willow, she was buried and Pike was counting her fence posts." Pike pointed at him. "This man is trying to profit through the girl." Daniel's voice roughened. "I have no claim." Rosalie left it to Sarah. "Then why hide?" Sarah asked. The question came out wounded, not angry. Daniel looked at her. "Because the first time I saw you, Pike's man was behind you at the depot." Sarah turned cold. What? Daniel nodded toward the deputy, but not at Harlan. Not him. A hired man. Brown hat, scarred lip. He bumped you near the baggage cart? Sarah remembered a shoulder striking hers, an apology muttered, her valise nearly falling. My ticket, she whispered. I saw him pass something to Pike by the alley. Daniel said, I took it back that night, dropped it where no one could say I handed it to you in secret. Eli's face had gone still in a dangerous way. Commissioner Cross turned to Pike. Yes, that true? Pike's laugh was thin. You will take the word of a felon. Daniel reached into his coat again, and this time pulled out something small wrapped in cloth. He unfolded it, a brass county seal. Commissioner Cross rose so quickly his chair scraped the floor. Where did you get that? From the man who stole the ticket, Daniel said. He also carried blank transfer forms for Rosalie Vale's parcel, already marked for auction. Seal first, names later. Pike's eyes flicked toward the window. Eli saw it. Pike bolted. He reached the door before anyone moved, shoved it open, and ran into the rain. Eli went after him. Deputy Harlan followed. Men shouted. Women screamed. Sarah stood frozen, then gathered her skirts and ran too. The storm had broken over Red Willow. Rain hammered roofs and turned dust to black mud. Pike slipped near the church steps, rambled up, and raced toward the library. Eli caught him at the gate, but Pike swung something bright. A knife flashed. Sarah screamed. Eli jerked back, blood cutting across his forearm. Pike tore free and vanished into the livery shadows. Horses shrieked. Then a shot cracked. For one instant, the whole town seemed to stop under the rain. Eli staggered out, leading a frightened horse, his sleeve dark, his jaw clenched. Behind him, Deputy Harlan dragged Pike into the open, pistol smoking from his own hand but aimed at the sky. Shot the lantern rope, Harlan shouted. Not him! He's done! Pike fell to his knees in the mud, cursing until thunder swallowed the words. Sarah reached Eli. Your arm, still attached. You are the most aggravating man alive. His mouth twitched despite the pain. I've been told, but when she touched his sleeve, her hand shook. He looked down at her fingers, then at her face. Rain ran between them like a curtain. For a moment, the town, the county, the papers, even Daniel Vale seemed far away. Eli said quietly, I'm all right, Sarah, not Miss Vale, Sarah. Her name in his voice sounded less like proof and more like shelter. Pike did not confess easily. Men like him rarely did. They had to be cornered by paper, witness fear, and the sudden disappearance of every friend who had once enjoyed their favors. By nightfall, the county seal, the blank transfer forms, Daniel's records, and the testimony about the stolen ticket were locked in Commissioner Cross's safe. Pike sat in the jail with his fine coat muddy, his cheek bruised from falling against the library rail, and his future shrinking by the hour. Sarah returned to Willow Bend in a wagon that smelled of wet leather and blood. Eli insisted he could ride. Mrs. Briggs called him a proud fool before he made it halfway up the porch. Sit, she ordered. I need to check the lower barn. You need to check whether your brains are leaking out through that arm. Sarah almost smiled. Then she saw how pale he was. The knife cut was deeper than he had admitted. It had opened the earlier wound from the calf and torn through muscle. Mrs. Briggs boiled water. Sarah cut away the sleeve. Ellis' jaw tightened, but he did not complain. Daniel stood awkwardly near the kitchen door, hat in his hands, looking like a man waiting to be told whether he belonged inside or out. Sarah felt too full of feeling to speak to him yet. Eli noticed. Even wounded, he noticed too much. Mr. Vale, he said, there's coffee on the stove. Daniel looked surprised. I don't want to impose. You already brought a county clerk down in the mud, Mrs. Briggs said. Might as well drink coffee. He sat, while Sarah stitched Eli's wound with hands steadier than her heart. Daniel told them the rest. He had been a reckless young man, fond of cards, fast horses, and men who laughed too loudly at honest work. He joined a freight outfit that turned criminal somewhere between Dodge and Abilene. When a robbery left a guard dead, Daniel swore he had not fired the shot. He still went to prison because he had held the reins. Rosalie wrote for years, he said. "At first," I answered. Then she sent word Eleanor had died, and her girl had suffered hard. "Rosalie wanted to find you. I had nothing to give but shame, so I stopped writing." Sarah tied a knot in the bandage. "Shame is a poor excuse for absence." Daniel bowed his head. Yes, her anger flickered, but beneath it lay something more tired. "I needed family." "I know," she said. "You know it now. You did not know it then, because knowing would have required action." Eli looked at the table. Mrs. Briggs grew very interested in the coffee pot. Daniel accepted the blow. "You have Rosalie's mouth?" That almost broke her. She had not known Rosalie's mouth. She had not known her laugh, her hands, the way she took tea, whether she sang hymns loudly or under her breath. All Sarah had of that woman was a letter, a locket, and the fierce sentence that had pulled her west. She stepped back from Eli and wiped her hands. "You should sleep in the bunkhouse tonight, Mr. Vale. Tomorrow we'll see what the commissioner decides." Daniel nodded. "Fair?" At the door, he paused. "Sarah." She looked up. "I did not drop the ticket to save land. I dropped it because when Pike said you had no name, you looked like your mother did the day our father told her she was dead to him for marrying Thomas Bell." Sarah could not answer. Daniel went out into the wet dark. The next morning brought no peace. It brought riders. 3 men came from town, not lawmen but citizens, with Commissioner Cross at their head. Eli met them on the porch with his arm bandaged and his temper poorly hidden. Sarah stood behind the screen door, listening. Cross removed his hat. "Mercer, I came to speak plain, then star. The county accepts there is enough evidence to delay the auction and open formal review." "Delay," Eli said. "For now." Sarah stepped out. "Not restore." Cross looked uncomfortable. "Miss Vale, Pike's crimes complicate matters, but the court must still validate the documents. Daniel Vale's past will be used against him. Some will say he forged records to help you." Daniel, standing near the barn, laughed without humor. "Some already are." Cross continued. "There is also the matter of taxes and fees. Pike inflated them, yes, but not all are false. The estate owes money. If unpaid, the claim remains vulnerable." "How much?" Sarah asked. Cross named a sum that made the porch boards seem to beneath her. Eli spoke immediately. "I pay it." "No," Sarah said. He turned. "Sarah, no." The word surprised even her with its force. Cross cleared his throat. "Payment from an unrelated man might create further dispute if the court questions influence." Eli's eyes stayed on Sarah. "Then relate me." Mrs. Briggs, who had come to the door, dropped a spoon. Sarah stared at him. Eli seemed to realize how the words had landed. He looked away, then back. "I didn't mean." "Yes," Mrs. Briggs said dryly. "You did. Badly." The commissioner suddenly found the horizon fascinating. Sarah's face burned. "Mr. Mercer," Eli, he said. Then softer, "I'm sorry. That was clumsy." "Clumsy as dropping a plate." I know." The riders left with promises of hearing dates and warnings that Pike still had allies. After they were gone, Sarah walked to the barn because she needed air that did not contain Eli's unfinished sentence. He followed at a respectful distance. Inside, sunlight slipped through gaps in the boards. Dust turned gold in the beams. Sunday the foal nosed at Sarah's sleeve, and Sarah stroked her narrow face, grateful for a creature too young to know scandal. Eli stopped by the door. I shouldn't have said it like that. No, I meant I could marry you to protect the claim. That is not better. He winced. No, Sarah turned. Do you think I came all this way to have my name preserved by taking yours? The question hit him. She saw it. No, he said. I think you came all this way because every place behind you tried to make you smaller. Then, do not help them. He removed his hat. Sarah, I have money enough to pay the fees. I have land enough to stand against Pike's buyers. I have a name this town respects when it wants to. I offered the tools I had, and forgot to ask whether I wanted them. Yes, the simple admission quieted her more than any defense could have. He stepped closer, not too close. When Rebecca died, folks tried to comfort me by deciding my life for me. Sell the ranch, keep the ranch, marry her cousin. Never marry again, pray harder. Work less, work more. Every voice was loud except hers. Because she was gone, I hated it. And today I did something close to it to you. Sarah looked at the fall, then at him. Why? He took a long breath. Because the thought of you losing that house after all this made me angry. And because the thought of you leaving made me afraid. There it was. Not a confession polished for romance. Not a proposal dressed in moonlight. Just truth, rough and inconvenient, standing in a barn. Sarah felt her own fear answer. I do not know how to belong to a place, she said. I only know how to survive in one. Then don't belong to me, Eli said. Belong to yourself here. If someday you choose to stand beside me, I'll count it grace, not payment. The quiet after those words seemed to hold its breath. Before Sarah could answer, Tom rode hard into the yard. Fire at Rosalie's place, he shouted. Everything changed at once. Eli grabbed his hat. Sarah ran for the wagon. Daniel came from the bunkhouse, buckling his gun belt, with old shame turned into present purpose. Mrs. Briggs shouted for blankets and water barrels. Rosalie Vale's house sat beyond the church road, half hidden by cottonwoods, with a sagging porch and a chimney of pale stone. By the time they reached it, smoke poured from the back room. Two men on horseback galloped away toward the south ridge. Pike's friends, Eli said. Daniel swung down before the wagon fully stopped. I'll go after them. No, Sarah said. The house, she did not think. She ran. Eli caught her at the porch. Sarah, wait. My aunt's things are in there. The roof might go. My name is in there. That stopped him. Only a second. Then he wrapped a wet blanket around her shoulders and took another for himself. Low and fast, they went in together. Smoke clawed Sarah's throat. Heat pressed against her face. The front room was dim. Furniture draped in sheets, everything smelling of soot and old lavender. Fire snapped in the back, eating curtains, licking the long shelves. Paper, Sarah coughed. Where? She did not know. She had never been inside. Panic rose. Then she saw it. A writing desk near the window, its drawers hanging open. Contents scattered, as if someone had searched before setting flame. She dropped to her knees. Eli kicked burning cloth away from the doorway. Sarah pulled drawers free, found receipts, ribbon, a dried flower, church programs. Nothing. Then her hand struck a tin box wedged behind a loose back panel. Eli, the ceiling cracked. He turned, eyes watering. Go! She clutched the box. A beam fell behind them, showering sparks. Eli shoved her toward the door. They stumbled out onto the porch just as the back room roared. Men formed a bucket line. Rain began again, sudden and hard, as if the sky had been waiting for drama enough. The fire fought, hissed, then slowly bowed under water and weather. Sarah sat in the mud, holding the tin box to her chest. Eli knelt beside her, coughing. Are you burned? She shook her head. His hand hovered, then settled lightly on her shoulder. Not possession, presence. Daniel returned near dusk with one captured horse and no riders. They split in the creek bed, he said. But one dropped this. He handed Eli a tobacco pouch stamped with the initial CP. Caleb Pruitt, Eli said. Pike's hired man. Sarah opened the tin box with trembling hands. Inside lay Rosalie's Bible, a small packet of letters, a photograph of 3 young people, and a folded document sealed in wax. Reverend Colton, who had arrived with half the town, recognized the seal. That is Rosalie's last codicil. Sarah unfolded it carefully. The words were in a bold, slanted hand. If any person should challenge Sarah Ann Vale, known also through hardship as Sarah Ann Bell, let this testify that I name her my blood and heir, not because blood is the highest claim, but because loneliness has followed the women of our family long enough. Let my house be hers if she wants it. Let my land be hers if she works it. Let no county officer, creditor, neighbor, or ashamed man arrest her name for profit or convenience. Sarah could not see the page after that. Reverend Colton took off his hat. One by one, so did the men around him. Commissioner Cross, standing with rain dripping from his beard, said quietly, "That will stand in court." Pike's allies tried one last time, because greed does not leave politely when shown the door. Caleb Pruitt was found 2 days later at a line shack south of Mercy Creek, drunk on stolen whiskey and boasting that no woman from Missouri would keep water rights from men who knew what to do with them. Deputy Harlan brought him in tied across a mule, which did more for town morale than 3 sermons. Pruitt talked by supper. He admitted Pike had ordered the tickets stolen, the auction papers prepared, and the house searched. He claimed he set the fire only to scare Sarah away. No one believed that part, but the law wrote it down. Pike, hearing Pruitt had spoken, demanded a lawyer from Wichita. Commissioner Cross sent for one, along with a circuit judge, a railroad agent, and a federal marshal, because forged land transfers tied to railroad surveys had begun to smell larger than Red Willow County. For a week, the town lived under the tension of approaching judgment. Men gathered outside the jail. Women carried pies to Mrs. Colton and opinions to everyone else. At the Mercantile, those who had whispered against Sarah now greeted her with careful sweetness. She accepted courtesy without confusing it for loyalty. Rosalie's house, though damaged, still stood. The back room was blackened, but the front room survived, as did the writing desk, the stone chimney, and a patch of stubborn yellow flowers near the porch. Sarah went there each morning with a broom, a bucket, and a quiet determination that made even Mrs. Briggs stop arguing. Eli came when ranch work allowed. He did not take over. He repaired the porch step only after Sarah asked. He hauled ruined boards, replaced window glass, and showed her how to test fence posts for rot. Daniel worked too, mostly in silence, mending what his absence could not. One afternoon, Sarah found him clearing weeds near the family plot behind the cottonwoods. 3 stones stood there. Rosalie Vale, Margaret Vale, and a small marker so worn the name had nearly vanished. Daniel knelt before it. "Eleanor," he said. "Your grandmother." Sarah stood beside him. "She ran off with Thomas Bell," Daniel said. "Our father called her faithless." Rosalie was the only one who wrote. "I was 17 and full of myself. I told Eleanor she had made her bed." Sarah looked at the stone. And had she had made a life harder than she deserved, better than we understood. He brushed dirt from the marker with his tomb. "I cannot give back what I withheld from her, or from you." "No," Sarah said. "I can stay until the roof is sound, and after." He looked toward the prairie. "That is for you to say." Sarah thought forgiveness would feel warm if it ever came. Instead, it felt like setting down a heavy tool after a long day. Her hands still ached, but they were free to hold something else. "You might stay for supper," she said. Daniel's eyes shone. "Thank you. I am not calling you uncle yet." He laughed once, broken and grateful. Supper is more than I earn. The hearing took place in the church because the courthouse room was too small for the crowd. That seemed fitting to Sarah. The same steps where she had nearly lost her name now held neighbors shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear it restored. The circuit judge was a lean woman from Topeka named Honora Bellamy, which caused half the town to sit straighter before she spoke a word. She listened to testimony with a face like carved oak. Pike's lawyer objected often and suffered for it. Pruitt sweated through his shirt. Daniel spoke plainly about prison, theft, and the ticket. Eli spoke only when asked, and even then said no more than truth required. When Sarah took the stand, the church seemed too bright. The judge asked, "State your name." Sarah's throat tightened. She looked at Pike. He sat stiff and pale, no longer polished, no longer powerful. She looked at Daniel, who bowed his head. She looked at Mrs. Briggs, Reverend, and Mrs. Carlton, Deputy Harlan, Commissioner Cross, and the townspeople who had once measured her worth by missing paper. Then she looked at Eli. He gave no signal, no nod, no smile meant to instruct her. He simply looked back as if her name had never been in doubt. "Sarah Ann Vale," she said. Born Sarah Ann Bell, daughter of Mary Eleanor Bell, granddaughter of Eleanor Vale, named heir of Rosalie Vale by blood, by letter, and by her own declared wish. Judge Bellamy's pen moved. "And what do you seek from this court?" Sarah had prepared to say property, recognition, restoration. All were true, but what came out was simpler. "I seek to be left whole." The judge looked up. Sarah continued, voice steady now. "I have been poor. I have been alone. I have used one family name and then another, because women often carry the names men leave them, give them, or take from them. But I did not come here to steal. I came because Rosalie Vale told me there was a place where my name would not be a burden. I am asking this court to make the law as honest as her letter." No one whispered. By sunset, Judge Bellamy ruled. The Vale claim was valid. The taxes were to be recalculated without Pike's fraudulent fees. The attempted transfer was void. The auction was canceled. Thaddeus Pike would be held for trial on charges of fraud, theft, conspiracy, and attempted unlawful dispossession. Caleb Pruitt would join him, loudly and without dignity. Sarah remained seated after the ruling, because standing seemed too great a task. Mrs. Colton wept openly. Mrs. Briggs pretended not to. Daniel covered his face. Eli stood near the back wall, hat in hand, and for the first time since Sarah had met him, he smiled without sadness, hiding all the way behind it. Outside, the church bell rang, not for a wedding, not for a funeral, for truths which in Red Willow had nearly become just as rare. That evening, the town gathered near Rosalie's house with lanterns, food, tools, and the uneasy energy of people trying to repair more than bores. Men patched the burned wall. Women scrubbed soot from dishes. Children carried kindling. The saloon keeper brought coffee and claimed it was medicinal. Deputy Harlan hung a new latch on the front door and blushed when Sarah thanked him. Sarah stood on the porch and watched lamplight fill the yard. For years, she had imagined home as a room where no one could tell her to leave. Now it looked more complicated. It looked like work, weather, memory, and people willing to return after failing you. Eli came up the steps carrying a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. "What is that?" she asked. "Something I should have given you after the hearing." She opened it. Inside was a narrow strip of blue ribbon, washed clean and pressed flat. Sarah stared. "The ribbon from the depot? I saw you looking at it the day you arrived," Eli said. "Picked it up later. Didn't know why." She touched the faded cloth. I thought it looked lonely." "So did you?" She laughed softly, though tears blurred the porch lanterns. "That is a terrible courtship speech." "I know. Are you making one?" His face grew serious. "I am trying to make no speech at all, unless you want one." Sarah looked out at the yard. Daniel was helping Mrs. Briggs argue with a stovepipe. Tom and Jude were carrying boards. Reverend Colton was holding a lantern too high and being corrected by his wife. Sunday, the foal pranced near the fence, all eggs and moonlit foolishness. "I was afraid," Sarah said, "that if I let myself care for you, people would say I traded one rescue for another. People say many things. They do. I can wait until their tongues wear out. That might take 50 years. I have ranch work." She smiled. Then silence came, deep and kind. Eli took something from his vest pocket. Not a ring. Not yet. It was the train ticket, folded along its old creases. The paper that had been stolen, dropped, doubted, and finally believed. "Judge Bellamy returned this," he said. She said, "Evidence belongs to the record, but names belong to people." Sarah took it carefully. For a moment she was back at the church gate, humiliated in dust, hearing strangers question whether she existed. Then she was here, on Rosalie's porch, with the ticket in her hand, and her name no longer begging permission. Eli said, "I love you, Sarah Vale, not because you need a roof, not because land touches land, not because grief is easier when shared, though my babe it is. I love you because you stood in a town that tried to make you vanish and asked the law to be honest. I love you because you speak to frightened horses like they are people, and to proud men like they ought to become better ones. I love you because when you laugh, this whole hard place remembers spring." Tears slipped down her cheeks. "That," she whispered, "was not terrible. I practiced with the mayor. She has good judgment, better than mine." Sarah looked at the ticket. "I love you too, Eli Mercer, but I will not be swallowed by your house or your name. I would not ask it. And Rosalie's place needs a roof. I know, and I intend to learn the accounts, the water rights, the fence lines, and exactly how much Pike overcharged every widow in this county." His smile deepened. "That sounds like a proposal to trouble. I accept." She laughed through her tears, and he stepped closer. When he kissed her, it was not sudden fire or desperate claiming. It was quiet, reverent, and earnest, like a man stepping across a threshold only after being invited. Sarah touched his bandaged arm gently, and he held her as if strength meant restraint. Behind them, Mrs. Briggs shouted, "About time!" and half the yard pretended not to hear. Winter came early that year, laying frost along Mercy Creek and silvering the church roof each dawn. By then, Rosalie's house had a new back wall, a sound chimney, and curtains Sarah had sewn from blue checkcloth. Daniel remained in the small room off the kitchen, not as a forgiven man exactly, but as a man learning to show up before forgiveness was asked of him. He worked hard, spoke little, and visited Eleanor's grave every Sunday. Pike trial carried him away in chains before Christmas. Some said he wept. Some said he cursed Sarah's name. She did not go to hear either. Her name no longer needed to stand in rooms where men tried to dirty it. Eli courted her properly through the cold months. He came for supper. He brought fence ledgers and asked her opinion. She rode with him to check cattle under a sky pale as pewter. Sometimes grief for Rebecca sat between them, and Sarah made room for it, because love that cannot honor the dead will not be gentle with the living. In spring, when Mercy Creek ran high and yellow flowers returned near the port, Sarah married Eli beneath the cottonwoods behind Rosalie's house. She wore a cream dress she had sewn herself, with the faded blue depot ribbon hidden inside the bodice where only she knew it rested. Judge Bellamy returned to perform the ceremony because Reverend Colton said the law had earned the right this time. When asked for her name, Sarah answered clearly, "Sarah Ann Vale." Then, after a breath, she smiled at Eli and added, "And Sarah Vale Mercer, by choice." The bell from the church rang across the prairie. Horses lifted their heads. Sunday the foal, taller now and still foolish, kicked up her heels near the fence. Years later, people in Red Willow would tell the story many ways. Some made more of the stranger in the gray coat. Some made more of Pike falling in the mud. Some preferred the fire, the court hearing, or the widow's house saved from ashes. Children liked the part where the ticket appeared near the church gate as if dropped by Providence itself. Sarah kept the truth simpler. A ticket had been stolen. A stranger had dropped it where lies could not easily pick it up again. A county had tried to turn a woman into paperwork and failed. A rancher had offered shelter, then learned to offer respect. A lonely woman had crossed the prairie carrying proof of passage and found, at the end of the rails, not just land, not just love, but the right to stand whole beneath her own name. On quiet evenings, when the sun lowered gold over Mercy Creek and the wind moved soft through the cottonwoods, Sarah would sit on the porch with Eli beside her and the old train ticket pressed between the pages of Rosalie's Bible. The church bell would ring in town, faint but clear, and she would look down the road where dust once carried shame toward her, and remember the gray-coated stranger dropping that folded paper near the gate. Then Eli would take her hand, the horses would graze in the fading light, and Sarah Vale Mercer would watch the prairie darken around a home no county could steal.